Turn-based strategy feels like it's properly waking up again in 2026. Between games like MENACE, Heroes of Might and Magic Olden Era, and now Warhammer 40,000 Mechanicus II, we're suddenly looking at an absolutely bumper year for tactical and turn-based games. They're not just surviving, they are thriving. So with a release date on the cards, I'm going to break down why Mechanicus II is worth watching, what actually seems new, and where I'm keeping myself a little bit skeptical. Hey everyone, this is Tom from LT Gaming. If you enjoy grounded takes on gaming in general without the usual faff and hype, give the video a like, help us get out there, subscribe for more content like this, and consider a membership if you want the ultimate form of support. Let's get into it. So for anyone who missed the first game, Mechanicus II is a sequel to one of the most quietly beloved 40k strategy games. Now the original Mechanicus wasn't trying to be XCOM with a purity seal slapped on, it had its own rhythm. It was about tech priests pushing deeper into a Necron tomb world, you had to manage risk, gather some cognition, make a few questionable decisions in the name of sacred data, and generally prove that the Adeptus Mechanicus aren't just archaeologists. And for me, this game was an absolute barnstormer. Mechanicus II is currently scheduled for release in spring 2026, so it's very much on my radar, as turn-based strategy as a genre is starting to look healthy again. And the sequel pitch is much broader this time. You're not just having tactical battles, the game is being framed around tactical combat, strategic management, control of an entire world, regions to capture and defend, garrisons to manage, resources to generate, and its 2 full narrative campaigns. I'm absolutely buzzing for this one, because in the first game the Necrons were the enemy waking up beneath your feet. In this game they're not the enemy anymore, they're half the bleeding game. So honestly, the single biggest reason the sequel has my attention is the playable faction of the Necrons, 2 campaigns and 2 completely different ways of thinking. Now the headline change for this game is Mechanicus II isn't just bringing the Necrons back as this ancient metallic nightmare, this time they're fully playable with their own campaign, their own heroes, and their own side to the war. And personally, I'm really happy about it. I've always loved playing Necrons in Warhammer 40k games, especially Dawn of War, they're my go-to faction. But what's interesting is it doesn't look like 2 different games stapled together. From what I can see so far, both sides seem to sit on the same tactical foundation. You'll have melee units, mid-range fighters, longer range options, hero characters, and battlefield abilities. Now while this sounds great, there is an issue here that both factions will need to feel distinct. They'll need to work inside the same campaign structure without feeling like slightly different flavors to each other. They're gonna have to really be unique. So I really hope the premise isn't just you can play as the bad guys now. I'd like to see it as you're playing the same war from both sides with enough flavor to make each campaign feel like worth playing all the way through. Onto the combat side of things now, and I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic. The game still seems to be built around hero-led tactical combat, which I think is great. The first game worked because you felt like your tech priests were the centerpiece. Supporting units had a role to play and they mattered, and they enabled your key characters to do the business of deleting everything else. And that broad structure looks like it's going to carry over here, but with more faction flavour, so I do like to see this. Now from what I can discern, the Adeptus Mechanicus seem to be focused on positioning, activation, and building towards efficient turns. Very fitting for a faction of obsessive machine priests, turning the battlefield into a spreadsheet with guns essentially. The Necrons meanwhile look like they're more about momentum, units coming back and reviving, power building as the fight develops, and that lovely feeling of alright, now I can really hit them hard. And this feels very appropriate for them. Now my one concern and what I hope the devs pay close attention to is making that difference last beyond the opening hours of the game. Because it's one thing for the factions to have different abilities, it's another thing for them to create a different rhythm across a full campaign. Mechanicus should feel precise, planned, maybe a little bit unhinged. The Necrons should feel ancient, inevitable, and deeply offended by anyone else who is still breathing. And now that brings us onto the bigger unknown, not the battles themselves, but what's going to hold them together, what's going to connect them. Mechanicus II is promising a wider war in this game across an entire world, defending regions, capturing new areas, garrisons, resources, all that stuff. And this could be a real evolution from the first game. Now the risk here is that it doesn't just become a menu between missions that you have to click through, it has to feel like you're part of a larger war. For this to work, territory has to have some meaning. Losing ground needs to hurt. Your garrisons and resources should force you to make actual decisions. And with 2 factions to think of, the sequel really needs to separate them in this mode of gameplay. Because if the strategic side has some teeth to it, Mechanicus II could be far beyond what the first one did, and that's a great thing to say. Now Mechanicus II will have some areas that it really needs to protect and get right if it wants to be the evolution and continuation from the first game. The first one worked because it didn't just feel like a Warhammer Tactics game, it has a very specific identity. The combat in the game was very clean, Tech Priest progression was very satisfying, the cognition system gave battles their own little rhythm, and you didn't just take turns and trade damage, you had to kind of build momentum across the map, and try to squeeze as much value out of each action. But probably the most important aspect to me was that it understood the Adeptus Mechanicus. They weren't just presented as generic sci-fi soldiers in red cloaks, they felt like machine worshipping zealots in all their grim dark glory, and the tone carried the whole thing. The music, the writing, the ritual language, the eerie Necron threat, it gave the game a personality that stuck with people long after the missions themselves. So for Mechanicus II, the challenge is clear. It needs to be bigger but not blunter. The new strategy layer, playable Necrons, wider campaign structure, the 2-sided war, they all sound promising, but it can't come at the cost of that tight tactical rhythm and that weird religious machine atmosphere that made the first game stand out. So it's very fair to say that Mechanicus II is firmly on my radar, not just because it's 40k, although that obviously helps. It's there because it looks like this is a sequel that's trying to expand in the right places. Playable Necrons are a big win. 2 campaigns will give the conflict more weight. The combat looks familiar, but still distinct enough that each faction should have its own rhythm. But the big question for me is the strategic layer. If territories, garrisons and resources create real pressure, it will feel like a proper planetary war. If they don't, then it risks becoming a slightly fancier mission select screen. So for me, Mechanicus needs to deliver on 3 things. Factions need to feel different across a full campaign. The strategic layer needs to have some teeth and depth to it, and it needs to keep that same aesthetic, atmosphere and vibe that the first game had and made it stand out. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic here, but what about you guys? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Which campaign are you more interested in playing? And is there any concerns that you have with a sequel to such a stellar first game? Alright guys, that'll do it for today. See you on the next one. Bye bye now.